I'm Hannah Benson, and you're listening to All Things ESL, a podcast for ESL professionals. Okay, I have a whopper of an advertisement for you. What if I told you you could combine your efforts for parental involvement, no matter how uninvolved they are now, and your efforts for, well, name it, student special education needs, funding for materials, student success in mainstream classes, any of it, and your job would get simultaneously easier. Imagine the load off your shoulders. This episode is going to tell you how to do exactly that. Stay tuned. Before I put the phone to my ear, I had written out a little script for myself that was a pitiful representation of the 7 weeks I had spent in Costa Rica to complete that upper-level language requirement in my TESOL master's program. The phone rang. I sweated not so gracefully. The phone rang. I smelled my deodorant finally throwing in the towel. The line picked up and I heard, "Hola." For an ESL teacher, any interaction with parents is a stressful situation, even if you have good news to give. All hope of having a successful, positive interaction is marred by that constant knowledge that they might not understand a single word you say. But the linguistic barriers are only a small part of the communication difficulty. Cultural differences bring an entirely new spin to approaching student academic issues, such as in the case of learning disorders and SIFE students, adopted students. But then I'm getting ahead of myself. The first step, it seems, is getting people to even show up to parent-teacher conferences. And you said you had one family come, right?
Oh yeah, my open house.
Yeah, Jessica Schmidt is laughing because her open house turned out to be a bit of a bust.
I'm Jessica Schmidt. I teach ESL in the Wauwatosa School District in southeastern Wisconsin. I travel between schools. I'm at 2 elementary schools and a high school.
Any traveling ESL teacher knows that while it may be tough for a student or a teacher to get face-to-face time outside your regular schedule, it doesn't compare to trying to meet with a parent during school hours.
When I share my schedule with the classroom teachers, they're like, how do you do this? How do you know where you're supposed to go? And I just say, I keep my schedule up on my phone. I keep my schedule up on my computer. And when I get back to my desk, where do I go next? Oh, okay.
And setting up a time during open house or parent-teacher conference nights can be especially complicated. For all you newbies to the field, I'm going to let Jessica explain how she does it.
At the elementary level, I go into their classroom conference with the classroom teacher. And really, I'm just there to kind of provide my input and just maybe observe and take some notes of what the classroom teacher says is going well, what the classroom teacher is concerned about, anything that the parents have questions about. I'm there to answer for them. At the high school level, they actually sign up for a separate conference with me. They actually sign up for separate conferences with each individual teacher. That would be a nightmare to go to every one of those conferences. So they actually sign up for a time slot with me, and I just talk about what we're doing in my class and then just any observations I have from pushing into those other classrooms.
So after all this scheduling, only one family showed up. I asked on the K-12 ESL group on Facebook to get some tips from our fellow educators. The response was unanimous. You have to seek them. They're not coming to you. Suggestions as to solutions varied. Some send snail mail letters, post on a message board, have students return signed slips. They call home several times before the allotted time. Some teachers even send text messages from their cell phones. Still, attendance is weak across the board. And to find out why, I talked to Dr. Robyn Koslowitz, who we will hear more from in a future episode on helping ESL students who are cracking under the pressure of finding themselves in America. She's a school psychologist, and she described to me why there's a major gap between us, the ESL teachers, and the parents. We have so many expectations of education and the parents' roles in that, but we don't realize how many of our expectations may be cultural and, in fact, need to be taught.
To a certain extent, education is acculturation, right? Like when we're educating kids, we're also teaching them the culture. And I think sometimes that becomes a little sticky because the parent has certain cultural assumptions that they don't necessarily even know that they have about how kids act, what school is for, the nature of time, the nature of, the value of education and what type of education is most valuable.
Here to illustrate this point is Laura Gardner, a social worker.
But I remember this one time I was helping to facilitate a parent panel as essentially like a PD session for teachers. We had at this one school a parent from Nigeria, El Salvador, China, maybe 4 or 5 different countries represented. And then I was sort of loosely feeding them questions about, what is schooling like in your home country? Just very kind of general open-ended questions. And then they would share their answers, and all the teachers were in the audience learning. That's kind of how they were, learning about some of the cultures in their school. And the Nigerian mom was so funny. I wish I could remember her exact answers, but essentially she was saying how like her son comes home and he tries to invite her to different things at the school that he knows that are going on. And she's like, I always ask him, why are you bothering me? Like, why do I, why do I need this? Like, go away, and even in that setting, it was just perfect. She played out exactly what I was sort of trying to get the teachers to see, that like from her and a lot of that community's cultural lens, they just could not understand why we wanted them to come into the school. Like, what is the problem? What is wrong here? Oh, I know. And it was her son wanted her to help with his homework. And she was like, why would I help you with your homework? Like, it was just it was hilarious because all the teachers were sitting there with like their mouths open.
Laura Gardner is a social worker and pretty much a refugee superhero, operating out of DC and runs her own business called Immigrant Connections. She consults with school districts to improve family and community engagement in an effort to, as she puts it, fix systems, not fix students. She has a crazy intimate knowledge of government funding to aid refugees, and her website is called Immigrants, Refugees, and Schools.org. So while we are educating their kids, the parents are missing out on all of these cultural lessons the students are gaining. A lot of ESL teachers get frustrated that parents only seem to get involved when the grade is low. And why don't they understand that involvement needs to happen a lot sooner? What we need to remember is that parental engagement has so much more to do with educational success than meeting twice a year can produce.
Family engagement is important. It positively impacts student achievement, attendance. Kids are more likely to go to college. And then from my more social work side of things, family engagement helps tremendously with students' mental health, the behavior piece.
Legally speaking, Laura says there's an even bigger incentive for districts to get a little more cozy with ESL parents.
Family engagement is so intertwined with equity, and I don't know how districts are attempting to sometimes not incorporate their family engagement departments or any efforts that they have. Everything from helping kids to have access to field trips to ultimately all the stuff that you need to do to help get students prepared to apply to college or career.
So now we get to what parents are looking for from schools, as well as the part that they want to play in their own child's education. And as we will see, it has a lot to do with the parent's own educational history. So let's check back with Jessica Schmidt, who describes what her ESL parents were interested in hearing about during her parent-teacher conferences.
So this year I had them do a conference reflection, and I asked the students what they thought was going well, what they thought they needed to improve, how they could help themselves improve, and then what their teachers, just their teachers in general, could maybe do to help. Opened up the floor for, okay, this is what your child feels he or she needs to improve. What do you think about that? Usually it was pretty right in line with each other. They were interested in finding out what their kids thought they could do to help themselves.
Okay, so before we go totally rogue and start generalizing parents by cultural background, which we will get to, we're going to break for a new section called ESL Trivia. All right, it's a title in the works. So while I was interviewing Laura, she boasted an impressive statistic.
I know the top 5 countries that the government is resettling at any given time.
Can you tell me those 5 countries? Off the top of her head, she gave me only 3. But I want you to try to guess what the 3 are. What are the top 3 refugee groups coming into America now? I'll reveal them at the end of the episode. Good luck! I used to work at Starbucks, and I loved it. Aside from the scary fact that everyone there also graduated with an English degree, I got really good at predicting what drinks people would order based on their cultural background or profession. Europeans would order solo or doppio espressos. Big rig drivers would order red eyes, that's the coffee with a shot of espresso in it. African Americans were more likely to order a crazy sweet drink like caramel macchiatos or white chocolate mochas. And white people were ordering lattes, Americanas, or something with a flavored syrup. And since I place value on these observations, rightly so or not, let's take a moment to be culturalist and not PC at all. Another ESL teacher I talked to said that her Asian ESL parents were more likely to be personally involved, while Middle Eastern parents were more resistant to discussing special education. Hispanic parents were more interested in a personal relationship rather than getting involved at the school. Now, singling cultures out like this is dangerous, obviously, not only because this is America and we don't do things like that, but also because depending on a parent's educational history, you might be missing out on a huge opportunity. Parents can get involved for a number of reasons. When I was in school, you always know which kid's parent to call to raise a big stink at school. But ESL parents obviously are kind of up against it, many operating with limited English arsenal. Oh, can we make that our new acronym? Instead of ELLs, we'll call them LEAs, limited English arsenals. Yeah, no, okay, maybe not. Truthfully, there's so many factors involved with parental involvement. And here's Laura Gardner again, social worker extraordinaire, to sort out what is called the hierarchy of involvement.
There's a woman named Young-Chan Han, who is a Korean immigrant herself, who's an educator in Maryland, so then now works at the Maryland Department of Education. And she developed this model called the stages of immigrant parent involvement. At the sort of base of the pyramid, you've got what she refers to as cultural survivors. They're immigrant parents dealing with poverty, they're dealing with immigration status issues, they're dealing with language barriers. For whatever reason, they're kind of in survival mode. She then talks about, in her model, what might that look like in terms of parent involvement? If you do see them in the school, they're probably going to need a fair amount of hand-holding, interpretation, and just they don't know where to go, they don't know what questions to ask, they don't really understand how the school system works, so on and so forth.
So basically, at the lowest level, you have a bunch of people who don't know English and possibly had little educational background themselves. It is up to us to inform them of how to be involved in the school, and basically, we need to teach them how to be a squeaky wheel. But this is the good news. For all of you who are ready to throw up your hands and say, like I have time to do that on top of my other stuff, there's a silver lining, and it's a big one. Are you ready for this? If you're willing to do the ground level legwork, hierarchically speaking, it will actually make your job easier in the long run. Okay, so think about it. What kind of power could a squeaky wheel parent have in a district? A ton.
From having worked at a board of education and seeing just how responsive upper level administrators are to parents' concerns, parents have an insane amount of power.
So right now, as an ESL teacher and as a fellow advocator, I submit to you that we have been advocating for the wrong people. Feeling like it is all on our shoulders to stand up for these kids and to talk with administration, work with social workers, work with school counselors, work with SPED or IEPs, or just putting all of that on our shoulders. We have been putting our efforts in the wrong place. Here's Laura on the next stage.
In the next level, she talks about cultural learners. And so parents that have started to learn a little bit more, maybe if your school does workshops for parents, maybe they start coming to one or two of those and start learning a little bit more about how the school works, how the school system works. And then she has two more stages in it where it kind of goes up She talks about cultural connectors. Let's say you have a Latina mom and you're trying to put on some kind of event, EL family night or a parent-teacher conference or what have you, and she goes and tells like 10 or 15 other moms. She's kind of like a community organizer, mover, shaker, spreads the information around kind of person. And she probably does a good job of advocating for the folks at the lower levels of the pyramid. And then finally, at the top, she talks about cultural leaders. It doesn't necessarily matter how long they've lived in the US, but it's someone who has kind of figured out the system. They know not only how to advocate for their child in the school, but they know how to help advocate for all the other kids. They know how maybe the whole school system works.
So for those of you who are not in a large district doing it on your own, this model still works and is still very much worth your time. Laura talks about how to use the model for your own district.
When I used to coordinate immigrant family engagement for the large district of Maryland, we often would take a blank version of this pyramid, just sort of this empty triangle with these 4 lines. So we had 4 levels going on. At the beginning of the school year, my team and I would sit down and we would create our programming and our planning around those 4 levels. So what are we going to do for our folks in survival mode? You know, it might not come to that parent-teacher conference night, but how can we support them?
The great thing about this blank pyramid is that it can be used as broadly or as small as needed for your district. So you have only 3 sets of parents? Great. They will probably all be on a similar level and you can focus your efforts on that. You have a massive district? Great. You can use those parents with a strong educational background and wheedle out that mover and the shaker and get that person or people to help you organize the lower levels. By all means, include them in planning for the lower levels. But Laura says there's one thing you should never do, and that is mix the levels with each other. Do not hold a level 1 meeting with level 4 people. It's insulting. And it doesn't show the upper level parents, hey, we have a job for you and we want and need you. And likewise, inviting level 1 people to a level 3 meeting would be overwhelming. And they might never want to come back because, well, level 1 is in crisis mode and they have a billion other things that they need to figure out for their family by tomorrow. So let's review. We can view that long to-do list as separate items of need. Okay, I got to go to that SPED meeting, meet with the teacher on the big project coming up, send out emails and call about parent-teacher conferences to talk about that last bad grade in science, meet with an administrator about getting funding for ESL curriculum development. Or you could say, call Beatriz Gonzalez Morales to get a hold of Lisa Chan to go over the agenda for their meeting with the principal on Thursday, in which they will discuss Charlie Chan's SPED meeting and more training for mainstream teachers in dealing with ESL students, while Hassan Adarhi is going to meet in front of the school board to discuss funding and ESL curriculum development. And you yourself will be meeting with 2 other parents to plan for the next parent-teacher conference night together. I heard recently that one school is encouraging parents not to come eat with their kids at lunch because they want the kids to have that time to socialize. I think we need more parents in schools, people. So as a final note, if you're trying to help out those parents in level 1, I recommend getting a sheet together of local and state aids to refer them to. And for help, particularly with state funds set aside for refugees, now that's refugees, not just immigrants, Laura recommends Googling refugee state coordinators. That's the person in charge of all refugee resettlement in that state. And they should be able to help you see the refugee school impact funding. And like I said, this girl's got an intimate knowledge of these things. Her website again is immigrantsrefugeesandschools.org. All right, time to check back with our ESL Trivia. Yeah, that title's not working for me. Okay, so I asked you, what are the top 3 refugee groups moving into the United States right now? And Laura said,
I think that the Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo, is probably number 1 right now. There's still, I think, some Bhutanese coming in and maybe still some from Burma. But I'd really have to look at the numbers. But Congo has got to be in the top 3.
Oh, yeah, Burma, I guessed. But yeah, didn't know about the Congo. Hopefully you did better than I did. Next time on All Things ESL, failure to launch, stories about students who did not handle the big move to America, and in the end, what finally saved their bacon. If you have an opinion about this or any other topic relating to the ESL profession, contact me by my website at allthingsesl.org. Thanks for joining me. I'm Hannah Benson.
ESL or EL or whatever you call it in your respective areas. Only way we're going to get more